Up, one of the most quietest teams in the Western Conference, let alone the whole NBA, that's a quote unquote contender, is going to have to be the LA Clippers. Now, I get the perspective, and kudos to the Phoenix Suns and the Utah Jazz in the Western Conference. But the LA Clippers, ever since they've gotten the pretty much the height of the media attention last season to right now, it's pretty much 0 to 100, far to none as of right now. The LA Clippers are in a position to where they've quietly retooled their franchise and their team, trying to make a strong push into the NBA playoffs to, number one, make their first conference finals appearance and in their own franchise history, and number two, make it out of the Western Conference to overtake the LA Lakers and potentially win an NBA championship against the Brooklyn Nets in the 2021 NBA Finals. Now, the key changes that the LA Clippers have made is, number one, they got Doc Rivers out. They brought in Ty Lue, who's done a pretty good job as of so far with the LA Clippers. Lou Will was traded away. He is out. They brought in Rajon Rondo. Montrezl Harrell left, and he is out there as well. They brought in Serge Ibaka. So within the beginning of the offseason to right now, the Clippers are a new team, a new culture, veteran presence, and filling in those quote-unquote gaps and holes. The Clippers are sitting at a 40-19 record, number 3 in the Western Conference. They're a game and a half behind the Phoenix Suns for a second seed. They are 3 games away from the first seed. You've seen a couple of these games that Paul George and Kawhi Leonard have been out due to injury from time to time, quote-unquote little load management. But we've seen a resurgence of a Paul George within this season, specifically the last week or two as of so far. My position stated, I still have the LA Lakers coming out of the Western Conference. I've always stated that I expect the Lakers and the Clippers to meet up in the conference finals. Now, I will give credit where credit's due to the LA Clippers, making the appropriate roster moves of bringing in Serge Ibaka in free agency. Nicholas Batum was also a steal that a lot of people did not have him on under the radar. And then, of course, bringing in Rajon Rondo, which everyone was expecting the Clippers to sign a free agency. But at the end of the day, they got a trade. They brought him into their franchise. So we're going to jump into first things first with Nick Wright and the crew. And we'll cover a little more into the LA Clippers and their standings in the NBA echelon, and especially how they'll pretty much result in the NBA playoffs.
One thing I have to give Paul George, Jenna, is he's transparent. I mean, he talked about his mental struggles in the bubble. He's talked about them not having an identity. Like, I give him that. He's open and honest and transparent. I think what he means is a few things. We know they had, I think, 3 major problems going into this season and even early in the season. One was defensively. I mean, they were a mediocre defense for most of this season, which is ridiculous when you have Paul George and Kawhi Leonard on the wings and even some of their other players. Since the All-Star break, they have been a top 5 defense in the league, 5th in the league. So that's where they should be. So that's one thing I'm sure he's referring to. Defensively, we're getting things together. Secondly, they needed leadership from a player perspective. That's not Kawhi. It's just not who he is. It's probably not Paul George either. But it is Rajon Rondo. And George came out and said that about a week ago. Now Kawhi doesn't have to try to be something he's not. Same thing for some of the other players. So you got the leadership thing. And then thirdly, they were a poor team in the clutch. Down the stretch of games, they struggled. They were one of the worst in the league because they didn't have a point guard and a playmaker to set the table. They were just putting it in Kawhi and PG's hands and saying, go. And now they've got Rondo to fill that void for them. Last night, Rondo goes for 8 points in the fourth quarter. In a 5.5-minute stretch, he had 5 points, 3 assists, which broke the game open. They went on a 19-10 run at that point that turned a close game into a rout. And so that's what those 3 things is what Paul George is talking about. And Rajon Rondo deserves a lot of credit for that.
And I forgot to mention, bringing in Boogie Cousins on a 10-day contract. Listen, Boogie Cousins, even though people have been saying he's washed for the last season or two due to injury and so on and so forth, Boogie Cousins is a huge piece for the LA Clippers. That, especially going into the playoffs, if Zubac is not going to get it done with, Marcus Morris, let alone, who's the other center? Serge Ibaka will be fine. But DeMarcus Cousins, I believe Ty Lue will probably give him around 5 to 10 minutes a night. Not too much, but Boogie, he's a very underrated pick for them. Also, Patrick Beverley is going to be out until the playoffs are going to start. So that's a huge loss. but a great opportunity for Rajon Rondo and Reggie Jackson to take on that point guard responsibilities of starting. And I've always stated, man, if I'm Rajon Rondo, or my bad, if I'm Ty Lue, the head coach of the LA Clippers, I'm starting Rajon Rondo because Paul George and Kawhi Leonard played too much ISO basketball that's forced because they never had a true playmaker because they've been forcing Patrick Beverley the last season and a half to play the starting point guard position. Patrick Beverley is like a Marcus Smart. He needs to be a two guy, a combo guard. He can play point guard from time to time, but ideally, it's better if you put him at a point guard if he's coming off the bench or playing with the second unit. Now, if he's starting, ideally, I would like him to be a starting shooting guard. You can always run up PG and Kawhi at the 3 and 4, but how this roster is shaped up as for right now, it's looking like they're going to keep Patrick Beverley at the 1, but ideally, I would like Rajon Rondo to be in that starting unit, to be that floor general out there. Ideally, that's what he's made up to be used for. And you're looking into the NBA playoffs. The Clippers folded against the Denver Nuggets. They did not have a playmaker. They did not have a true veteran leader who could handle the rock, who could change the pace. And that brought some chaos into the offensive quote-unquote system with Doc Rivers and the crew. Now bringing in Ty Lue, who's won a championship, who's overcome a 3-1 deficit lead, and bringing in Rajon Rondo is going to bring a calming force to this team that Kawhi Leonard is really going to lead on towards for leadership purposes. Rajon Rondo is quote-unquote, what do they call him? They call him Playoff Rondo for a reason. I mean, he just won a second championship. He was a huge component for the LA Lakers in that playoff run, especially in the finals as well. He will result the same thing with the Clippers now. Will they get to a conference finals appearance? I believe they will. The Phoenix Suns and the Utah Jazz are not true threats for anyone in the Western Conference, at least on my end. I don't think they are. Now, they're respectable young teams, but, I mean, at the end of the day, they'll be good in the first round. In the second round, when you're going to be matched up against the LA Lakers and the Clippers, we already know the Battle of LA. They're going to get it done with. The Denver Nuggets are at a 4 seed right now, but Jamal Murray's out for the season due to the ACL. So, Jokic may be a potential MVP, but the Nuggets, they're done. They're out the first round. They're most likely going to match up maybe with the LA Lakers in the first round, and the Lakers are probably going to take them out if they're matched up in that 4th, 5 seed. But I've been kind of talking too much on there. Let's go back to the Lakers or the Clippers.
Yeah, I want to say on something you talked about, you mentioned earlier. You talked about his mental health and PG-13, right? This isn't the same team that entered the bubble last year. This team is different. And this is a big deal. Sometimes on television, when we talk about our athletes, we talk about the physical so much. We never really lean into the mental and the mindset and that type of makeup. That's the most important thing. We're talking about 80% of sport, 80% of life is mental, 20% is physical. But we don't spend a lot of time developing our brain and training our mind. We don't do it. Paul George in the bubble, what you said, Chris, he came out fully transparent and said, I'm talking to a therapist right now. There's some things I'm dealing with. And since then, we've seen Paul George, when healthy, play really well. To me, the question marks around this team is all about the stuff off the field. It has nothing to do with, off the court. It has nothing to do with really, truly, like real basketball. These are things that you can handle, in the locker room. These are things that you can handle at the table, sitting down with your coaches and your teammate. This team didn't want to play last year. Everybody in the NBA, the people that I heard when I was sitting back as a fan and I wasn't broadcasting, I heard everybody pick the Clippers for the most part. Everybody said the Clippers was a team to beat. And then all of a sudden the global pandemic hit and they didn't want to enter the bubble. And then you got Paul George, PG-13, playoff P, all that stuff. Well, what if him sitting down and dealing with whatever he was dealing with is the answer? Because that is the thing when we talk about basketball is the big two. Can you guys get it done on the court? Well, now you're seeing Paul George play at a high level. They're 10th in defense. They're 2nd in offense. They beat the 2nd hottest team in the NBA in the Suns. The Jazz are there, but we say we can't talk about the Jazz because nobody trusts them. Nobody believes in the Jazz. So this team, what they're showing you is that they're the best team in the West right now because the Lakers are beat up and banged up. So I really love what the Clippers are doing right now. You hit on it: chemistry, leadership. They're checking the boxes. And another thing that you didn't miss, in Chris, is load management. They're playing basketball when healthy. So Nick, I love what I'm seeing out the Clippers, and I think this team is dangerous, and everybody needs to pay attention.
Well, and the thing with the LA Clippers is bringing in Serge Ibaka was a huge piece. I mean, I was shocked the Brooklyn Nets did not pull Serge Ibaka away. Ibaka would have been more ideal for the Brooklyn Nets and what they're trying to look for, but the Clippers swayed on a good component right there, playing with Kawhi Leonard with Serge Ibaka. You nailed it on the money that the Phoenix Suns and the Jazz are not true threats. Listen, they're nice stories. Donovan Mitchell should be top 5 in MVP considerations. He has the best record in basketball, leading the Utah Jazz with Rudy Gobert to a 42-15 record. So that's one thing on the side. For the Phoenix Suns, they're a nice story with Chris Paul. He's an impact player. But if you're looking at the Phoenix Suns, if they're going to take on the Clippers in the second round or the LA Lakers, the Lakers will be taking the Phoenix Suns pretty easily down low with their bigs. And with LeBron James, the Phoenix Suns will not be able to touch those three of Drummond, LeBron, and then AD. Now, if you have the Phoenix Suns going against the LA Clippers, I think that could be around a 6-game series or so. When it comes down to it, the LA Clippers will be more prepared, especially after their meltdown from last season. Now, if we're talking about the Lakers and the Clippers in the NBA playoff series, that's a different subject for another day on that side of things. And lastly, I don't want to hear about this bubble talk that the Clippers were not ready. The Clippers were favored to come out of the Western Conference by media. And, I mean, if you're looking at more of a team roster and fills and roles and stuff, the Clippers should have been favorites on that. Now, I always had the Lakers due to other circumstances, which you can watch my other videos on that. But I don't want to hear this talk about the Clippers were not prepared. They didn't want to be in the bubble. You were up 3-1 against the Denver Nuggets, the baby Nuggets, and you blew 3 straight games in a row with the reigning finals MVP on your team, the quote-unquote best player in the world or second best player in the world, Kawhi Leonard, during that time. I don't want to hear that.
And for all those reasons, that's why this year, and this will shock Broussard, but this year, I really do believe that if, let's assume health and nothing, no bad luck, that if everything breaks right, I really do believe the Clippers can make their first conference finals in team history.
You guys know I like doing this show. Nick Wright's hilarious, man. Even though he's trying to say it straight, but he's actually trolling inside because the Clippers, they're trying to win a championship or go to the finals. But, and like what I stated in the beginning, they're going to make the conference finals. That's a goal for them, but of course they want to win a championship. But, Mr. Nick Wright is going to be trolling Mr. Chris Broussard all the time.
That's a good trajectory. You go from second round exit, third round exit. Like they are better than they were last year. Now, are they good enough to win the West? I don't think anywhere close. But I do think they can make the first conference finals ever. I also think last night, I hope people stayed up to watch because that was awesome. It was, I think when we showed it, the best dunk of Kawhi's career. You never see that type of dunk, ferocious dunk on someone in traffic. I thought it was the best dunk of his career. And he did it on True Center. You had Patrick Beverley doing Patrick Beverley things, annoying Chris Paul, getting kicked out. You had TNT experimenting with something they should experiment with more, which is they muted Reggie Miller for almost a full quarter. I applaud that. Try working that out a few more times. And on top of that, and Wilds, I know this was your favorite part, and this is why the Clippers can be better than last year. You had playoff Rondo show up. And you might say, well, Nick, it's not the playoffs. But it kind of was a playoff-ish game. 2 of the hottest teams in the West. They're competing for seeding. Yep. It's a big spot. And this was the first time Rondo has had a great game since the playoffs last year. For the Hawks, or his first couple games with the Clippers, first time Rondo's been great was last night. And it's maybe not a coincidence, Wilds, that it happened in the biggest game he's yet played for the Clippers. So if all that happens, I do think they're good enough to lose to the Lakers in 6 in the conference finals.
Oh, man, I can't with this show anymore. Oh, man. Nick Wright, man, he be loving himself some LeBron James and trolling out here. Oh my gosh. I told you guys, I expect the Clippers and Lakers to reach in the conference finals. I mean, if you're the Jazz going against the Clippers, or if you're the Suns, the Clippers got the number on both of those teams. Now those are going to be. Now I fully expect the Suns to go against the Clippers in the second round, and the Jazz to go against the LA Lakers. I don't expect the Denver Nuggets, especially with Jamal Murray out, who was electric against the Jazz in the first round last season and against the Denver Nuggets in the second round, but he's going to be out. And you're asking too much if you're going to bring in an Austin Rivers or Monte Morris to take on those responsibilities. Jokic will do his thing. Michael Porter Jr. has another year in his belt. Plus, you have Aaron Gordon, but nah, I expect the Denver Nuggets to be bounced in the first round if they're on that fourth seed, and especially if they go against the LA Lakers in the first round. The Blazers, Mavericks, and potentially the Warriors, those other teams will be bounced in the first round. So the West has nice teams, but the only tier 1 teams I see are the Lakers and the Clippers. The rest are tier 2s with the Jazz, the Suns, was going to be the Nuggets. And then the tier 3s are going to be the Blazers, the Mavericks, the Warriors, and the Grizzlies. So if the LA Clippers do make it out of the Western Conference somehow, some way, then I fully expect them to go against the Brooklyn Nets. And I'm going to have to take the Brooklyn Nets to win that championship if they go against the LA Clippers. Now, ideally, I actually would like that NBA Finals. I stated last season, in the 2020 season, that once the Lakers won a championship, I would like to see a Kawhi Leonard versus Kevin Durant NBA Finals for 2021, but we already know what's going on, so we'll end it off on there.